Steve, over to you.
Thank you, Nick, and thank you very much for inviting us today. We're really pleased to be here. I'm just going to share my screen, and just by way of introductions, my name is Amanda Pujol. I'm the Director of Customer and Transformation at Teignbridge, which is in Devon. And I've been involved in the project for 6 years now, so from the time it was actually developed. And I have my colleagues, Steve Maughan, who will introduce himself sort of halfway through the presentation. Steve's Director of ICT and Digital Transformation at Strata. Strata is our TECO company, so we have a TECO company for our ICT services here at Teignbridge Council that's shared with Exeter and East Devon. And I've got Craig Wilkins, who he's here in a personal capacity. You might have run into him due to his work on iStand, but Craig has been integral to developing this when he was at Sedgemoor and also at Somerset. So thank you to Craig for giving up his time today. So I'm just going to share my screen. If you just give me 2 minutes. Hopefully, just to go into presentation mode, people can see that. Steve, if you would like to say yes, because I can't see anybody else on the screen. So
we're seeing it in presentation mode, Amanda.
Yeah,
you might want to share the other screen.
Sorry.
You might want to share your other screen. The.
Right. Okay. Hang on. Right. Just give me a second. Technical difficulties. Share this screen. Is that okay now?
It's black now.
It's black now.
Do you want me to present?
Yeah.
Oh no, there you go.
Right. Okay. That's it. So I'm going to talk about the development of the open source revenue and benefit system. Some of you might have heard me talk about this before. This project is a partnership project. It has been developed with partners from 2 other councils. So Basildon and Brentwood, they have a shared revenue and benefit system. They've been involved from the outset of this project. And the other partner is Leeds Council, who have also been involved from the alpha stage of the project. And as I've kind of indicated, the original idea, I guess, for this project came from Sedgemoor. Sedgemoor were one of only 2 local authorities in the country who had their own in-house built open source revenue and benefit system. So, and they had run that for a number of years before this project had been initiated. So hopefully the next slide is going to come up. The joys of technical. So a bit about the introduction and rationale for the system. So the system, as I said, we put in a bid about 6 years ago to the local digital fund when that was first initiated. And we had recognised that there were a number of market challenges around the existing Revs Bens system that we had. So we had recognised the challenge with legacy systems which cause high costs and reduce productivity with outdated interfaces and manual workarounds. Now, in my role at Teignbridge, I am Strategic Director responsible for Revs Bens, and my staff were coming and telling me about the number of workarounds that they were having to do with our existing Revs Bens system, and that it really didn't meet their needs or customers' needs. And we had a challenge with our overall sort of transformation programme about how we could transform that system and make it better for customers and staff. There was also a demand for modular solutions, so there's growing need for modular interoperable software that was adapted to legislative changes and integrated easily. One of the challenges we'd encountered and other councils had encountered was difficulties around obviously integrating their Revs Bens software with some of their other customer platforms. We saw the benefits of an open source approach because we thought it offered transparency, flexibility and shared innovation to avoid vendor lock-in and reduce cost. And we were looking for future-ready cloud architecture, so cloud-native API-first system, which we thought would improve the user experience, foster collaboration and align with government digital strategies. And I think it's interesting now that the government has published their blueprint for modern government earlier this month, to see that obviously some of these challenges have been recognised within that paper. We also thought there was a significant cost saving and value proposition to looking at an open source development for Revs and Bens. We estimated that transitioning to an open source would reduce our IT costs by approximately £100,000 compared to our current systems. And we saw some systematic advantages with reducing vendor lock-in, being able to update legislative updates more responsively, and allowing resource pooling for future development. We saw it as being a more innovative and flexible product, so we could customise workflows freely and enhance responsiveness to policy changes and local needs, particularly evident now around some of the policy changes we have to make quite regularly on council tax support, and the open source adoption supported modern, adaptable public services, and we wanted to encourage that sector-wide collaboration. As we've said before, it is very much a partnership approach in terms of the development of this system, and I'm very, very lucky to have the partners on board that have stuck with development and the project for the last 6 years. So going back to the project timeline, just for people who might not be aware of the history, so 2020 was when we put the initial discovery bid into local digital, and we did a feasibility study with over 20 councils, who largely just to test out whether the test of change that we thought was there was actually there in practice, and to test out some of the dissatisfaction, I guess, that we had with the system, to see whether that was just a singular issue in Teignbridge and with the councils that were part of the project, or whether there was a bigger problem and I guess a bigger drive within the sector to challenge the existing offer. And I'll come on to some of the headlines from that study in a second. 2021, we put in a further bid to local digital. That was for an alpha project, and the 2021 project was to test some of the migration tools and integration, and to see if we could migrate a business rates system from one council to the open source version of the system that Sedgemoor had developed, because we recognised there was a massive challenge and massive concern about migration. So when we spoke to councils in the Discovery project, that was seen as one of the major barriers to changing systems, not just to any open source system, but to any system, with a lot of traumatised individuals who'd had to migrate systems between some of the big suppliers, sharing their pain over that. And there was a bit of a lull after that. As we know, there'd been some changes in government and local digital priorities. However, we continued to work with Somerset, who had then taken over the code from Sedgemoor, because Sedgemoor went into Somerset as part of the unitary, to negotiate with them about whether they would be able to release the code, and they would support us completing the software. So that's a bit of a timeline of where we are and where we've got to now. So some of the Discovery project findings and the Alpha project findings, I think, are useful to share. Everybody said that the existing systems did the job. They processed revenue and benefits. They processed it on time. There was no concern over them actually, doing the job they needed to do. Whether they were doing it most effectively and most efficiently and with a customer-centric approach was perhaps another question, but they generally delivered. I've talked about system migration. People saw that as being very risky, and there was a feeling from local authorities that they felt trapped and they were resentful of spiralling software costs. But that in order to change, and particularly to change to an open source product, they needed to have confidence. So it was clear that there needed to be a track record of migration, and the system worked before you would be able to perhaps get a head of steam or of movement to take on any new system. Local authorities were seeking flexibility and they wanted to manage continuous improvement. They wanted to have an active role in developing that roadmap for changes. And there was a need to build incrementally at the right time. One of the things that a lot of revenue and benefit staff vocalised was that the significant workarounds that they had to do in their current system, which obviously impacted on productivity and the ability for staff to do their job efficiently. But regardless, there was a huge appetite, I think, to disrupt this particular market, mindful of the fact that there was very few suppliers in the market and it was a very costly system. And recognising, of course, that it is one of the main systems of any kind of local authority because it touches practically every household due to the impact and reach of council tax. So some of the quotes from that discovery, migrating to a new system would be a massive undertaking, would take years, and there was a lot of risk involved. This was from one participant. This was another one. We haven't really got any choice. They have us over a barrel. That was very much the view around the current supplier market. And some frustrations around what people were paying for and what they were actually getting delivered when they did try and integrate and modernise their systems. So we were asking for the APIs rather than the whole portal, and they were wanting to charge us double just for the APIs. So people felt they were paying more and not getting the functionality that they actually wanted from the suppliers that they were working with. So moving on to the alpha, we wanted to prove that we could migrate the Leeds business rates data into the open source system. So at that point, Sedgemoor had completed the business rates module, or 90% of it, of their open source system. So Sedgemoor originally had a green screen system. They were investing hundreds of thousands of pounds outside of the project to put that onto a modern platform, which Craig can give you a bit of insight into. And the local digital funding also obviously came on board with that to look at how we could make that system open source for the wider local authority family. But bearing in mind that we were concerned, and so were other councils, around the ability and how easy it would be to migrate, we decided to test migrating business rates data from Leeds into the open source system, because the business rates element was the one that was most complete. So we created a new instance of the system in Azure, imported the gazetteer data, and we did migrate the data from the Leeds business rate system and tested the REST API. So we proved that we would be able to migrate the Leeds business system into the new system. It should be said that Leeds and Teignbridge and Basildon Brentwood, we've got 2 of the 3 main supplier systems for Revs Bens across the partners. So we worked very closely with people in Leeds and Sedgemoor and consulted with the Revs Bens experts in Leeds to understand the data model from Capita, which is their Revs Bens supplier. We used Azure Data Factory to transform CVS files into tables, extracted and converted the data to be pumped into the SQL database. And we used a Swagger UI to call up the open source REST APIs. Anybody who wants any sort of technical detail on that, I think it would be better to ask Craig than me, but that was what we managed to achieve through the alpha. So what we achieved, learned that we could deploy the Azure infrastructure and automate the process through ARM templates. We could map the data from Leeds to what was the Sedgemoor system, import the gazetteer, and tested APIs. We also wanted to take the opportunity with the alpha to get some key insight from users, because we were clearly building the system from a user research point of view. So we did commission some user research, particularly around business rates customers, to understand what they would want from a system. And quite clearly, they wanted real-time query status. Users wanted to see the status of their submitted queries instantly to minimise unnecessary follow-ups. So that visibility about what is going on with their case was really important. Transparent billing explanations. They wanted clear explanation for changes and reissued bills. that was essential for users to avoid confusion and concerns. Simple refund process where there was refunds that had to be initiated, and a data export for multi-management. And what we realised that a lot of business rate customers, some of them were dealing with managing multiple licenses, and they wanted to easily export billing data so that they could integrate it with their own systems. So that was the user research that we gleaned from the alpha, and we want to make sure that obviously that's built in to the system. It should also be said that when Sedgemoor originally had developed the system, they did significant amount of work on user research and personas around business rates, council tax, and Revs and Bens more generally. So we're building it from a user perspective. But I think, you know, the key thing in terms of moving the system forward was governance, because a system large and fully featured enough to handle all revenue and benefits across the UK would need at the same time to stay flexible enough to allow legislative changes and local variation. The system also needs to be able to adapt as it grows, taking on board user research and feedback to iteratively improve without becoming the next inflexible legacy system itself. So it's key that obviously you have that core element of the system where you have all the legislative changes and you have the core data, but around that there's a need for that flexibility, whether that's through document management or whether that's through your own council tax policies. And governance and how that system is amended and updated would be key to moving forward with an open source system. So just some headlines here from the Alpha report. Overall, the study concluded that building an open source system was feasible, strategically advantageous, and it aligned with modern public sector digital practice. But it acknowledged that there were risks and there would be investment required. So obviously one of the big benefits to open source was that reduced vendor lock-in, particularly when you have a significantly small market, and also the ability to share development costs for greater efficiency. We're all moving to more modular API-driven design, and that ease of integration with other systems and allowing quick policy changes was definitely seen as a significant advantage. And we did also undertake significant amount of work just investigating on a desktop basis what we could do around the governance challenge, and working with our partner at that time, which was MadeTech. We came to the conclusion that governance through a council-owned foundation would ensure transparent decision-making and ongoing collaboration. So having looked at the various kind of options around how you could govern an open source system for councils moving forward, we felt that sort of council-owned foundation model would be potentially the best option. So I'm going to hand over to Craig, who's going to talk a bit about the technical architecture and the features of the system. So I'd like to introduce Craig Wilkins.
Thank you, Amanda. I can't take control, so someone else is going to have to flip through the chart.
It's all right. Just if you just say change slide, then I'll do it.
Yeah, that's what I thought you'd say. No problem. Okay. Well, welcome everyone. As Amanda says, I used to be the head of ICT at Sedgemoor and then Somerset, and then latterly I'm working with iStand UK on standards approach across many different systems. So that's been my key area of interest, to be honest, and trying to make things more interoperable across government ever since I've worked in local government. So I thought I'd talk about the Sedgemoor business rate system because that was near to completion at the time. And as you can see here, we've got we've completed a lot of the core functionality. You can add quite easily any additional functionality that needed to be facilitated. But the important thing is when we move on to legislative changes, I think when we looked at this and the best approach is that sits at the core of the solution. Even though it's open source, people can, if you know anything about the technical side, can pull down branches in the sort of Git repositories, make changes and then push back to the core. But that can basically disrupt the whole system. So the idea was keep that core under control of whatever the governance model we decided at the time, and work with the community to enhance that. However, the important thing is these systems are very parameter driven that we've developed, and that was from a legacy of Sedgemoor District Council. We always found that we could implement the legislative changes quite quickly. So if I take a good example at the moment, which is business rates for public houses, that is a simple change based on a threshold and whatever discount has been agreed in central government, and it's under the control of the end users. It wasn't a massive technical implication. Or I could take the DWP's housing benefit scenario with council tax support with the number of children, again very parameter driven, and allows people to make the changes that they need. That means it's very important to store those configurations in a way that they are accessible to people, and obviously around some of the policy decisions you have your own local policies, and one of the challenges perhaps for many is London operates a slightly different policy because of the mayoral governance arrangements with other London authorities, and you'll probably see this as we move to combined authorities, Sedgemoor / Somerset, or the West of England, and we have a West of England combined authority, but we don't have one covering Somerset, Devon authorities yet, and Cornwall, but it will come into fruition in time. So again, it's very important that you can control at local level those policies. And again, the idea was, and the system's capable of doing it, do we build one system and deploy it once for one authority, or do we have a big enterprise solution that can be tailored to each customer? And it gives us that flexibility. So that's where we are with the concept of the open source. Thank you. As I think we've touched on, the important thing is that this is cloud native, and that's quite rare across government, full stop. You might see it in private sector, but this is where, do I want to install this product on Azure under Microsoft, or do I want to install it under Amazon using their S3 buckets or their different container solutions, or elsewhere? And that was the principle. I will say we developed against Azure, but obviously we've tested against Amazon and the AWS services to prove compatibility. But even when you choose your cloud native approach, you still need to build or break down that monolithic approach that a lot of the vendors have created in their systems historically. Even Sedgemoor in the legacy system was quite monolithic, had lots of interoperability, but it's still monolithic in approach. So we looked at what the technology allows us to do. So we've utilized microservices and APIs in a componentized fashion, so we can just modularly change a microservice, update it, and make it available through an API. And if anyone knows anything about APIs, you can use Swagger, so you can actually see the full extent of the parameters that are needed in those APIs and the methods that are called. So that's quite a big step change. Might sound a bit technical, and most of the business people wouldn't need to worry about that. But the important thing with cloud native, it gives you a massive cost opportunity to work with whatever vendor you so fit. Not forgetting that a lot of the government agencies that you are or we are defined by the Microsoft agreement with Crown Commercial Services. So there's a bit of flexibility in there, but it's still quite restrictive, I would say, generally. Obviously, security and compliance. We talk about encryption. Authorities are still being challenged with security issues that come from foreign agents. A good example, I think, is if you look at Gloucester City, they've been heavily challenged, and it's still impacting on a lot of their systems. So it's really important for design a solution from the beginning, especially from a web perspective, that there's really strong encryption across every step of the way. And then I guess one of the important things is, data at rest is fully encrypted. So it's quite hard to get into that data and extrapolate it and obviously break it down. So everything was there as we needed, especially from an audit perspective and DWP's perspective, who always ask you, is your system secure? in a wider sense anyway. I'll break that down. Again, we also looked at interoperability and integration, and that stems back from Sedgemoor. When I was there, we had a quite significant enterprise architecture. We drove the suppliers to actually integrate across all the different silos, excuse me, that work across the enterprise, or did. And that can be challenging because some people have integrations, some didn't, but we had the skills to actually interface to a lot of these systems by using various backdoor mechanisms. And that proved dividends for us, because obviously we could utilize that and that knowledge in the build of this system. When you start looking at collaboration in a wider sense, we're talking about open source community, you need to store that solution that you've built. So we use a Git repository. In this instance, we use Microsoft Azure DevOps because we had experience of that, but that does not say that you can't use GitHub specifically. And if you look across quite a wide area of government, GitHub's used extensively. So the idea was originally that we'd start in Azure DevOps, work through all the branches, the pipelines, etc., and then ultimately move it into Git so the wider community could use. We've looked at testing generally across that. So we use Selenium for a lot of our testing, linked into DevOps. So we were very engaged at the enterprise level of software development, which a lot of people would not see or utilize. And obviously you can see there we've tested it with business rates. I think that might be Capita rather than Civica, but the principle's the same. And the team that did work for me, obviously we've had to migrate Somerset's Revs Bens system, have got experience across all those different migration paths. Obviously it needs to be proved against dissolution, but there is quite a lot of work that's been done. I think we're going to show some demos anyway in a minute, but we've got a demo of our housing benefit system, which we've built in a way that use wizards. So I guess in some respects in the modern world now, considering this was built, probably finished in terms of development 2 years ago when it was frozen, you had to use AI agents in effect and try to automate the process. So, but hopefully we can show you the demo to show you how that would work for housing benefits. And it's slightly different from business rates and council tax, because as we started with business rates and then moved to council tax, we had another pipeline for housing benefits, and our learning actually grew, and the developers actually changed the way they wanted to operate. So they look slightly different, but don't worry too much about that. And in terms of the interface and compliance, obviously I'm sure a lot of you are aware of the sort of Shibi API connections, or as it used to be, sort of static reporting that used to do monthly. So that's built into that model. And Sedgemoor historically, because we had our own in-house legacy Revs Bens system for over 25 years, had already built against a lot of these interfaces. So CIS, the UC schema, etc. But everything works. Next slide, please.
I think we're on to the demo now.
Okay.
So I'm going to
Okay.
stop sharing and hand over to Steve, who's going to share his screen and just give you a quick sort of 10-minute demo of the system.
Thanks both. Do let me know if you can hear the sound.
And I'm Camilla Modely. I'm the product owner for the business rates project, and I will demonstrate now one process in the system, in the business rate system. So we start creating a property in the business rate system. Or to create a property, we need to have a new PRN, and then we can search for the addresses in the Gazetteer file. So here I have a new PRN. We can search using an address or a postcode. And here we have the results from the Gazetteer. In this case, we will use the primary address, and we can see the description. We can then select the VOA category and description. So this list is provided by the VOA. And if needed, we can add other UPRNs to the list. And then we would have the VOA address. And we can also change the description. We can add more details to the description. So we have the description provided by the VOA, but we can add more details if needed. And we can create our property. Once we have created the property, we can then create the account in the system. Let's create the account. We can create a basic scenario starting on 1st of April, and then we can make some changes and see the calculation of the charts. So we start with 1st April 2021, occupation status occupied, and we can link our property to this account. So we can search using the UPRN, address or postcode, and we then create our account. We can add liable parties to our account, and we can add liable people that are already created in the system, or we can create a new person if we can't find the record in our system. So let's search for Smith. In this case, we have John and Joanna Smith. We can check their details. Here we have the correspondence address. John Smith doesn't have previous names. Checking the correspondence address, that's the person we want to add to the account. So we can select John Smith. If we needed to create a new person, because the Smith we are looking for is not Joanne or John Smith, we could then create a new person and link to the account. But in this case, we already have the person created, then we can use the same record. And the same works for the organization. If we need to add an organization, we can use the organization created in our database, and we can add one or more liable people and one or more organizations. And we can also add authorized parties. In this case, it would be agents, for example, and we can add authorized people or authorized organizations to lead with this account. And we have the billing details. By default, it is barcode, the payment method. We calculate 10 installments with payment day on 1st, but we can change from 10 to 12 installments, and we can also change the payment day, and we can change also the payment method from barcode to direct debit to internal transfer. If we change to direct debit, we can then maintain the bank details and create a mandate. For this example, we can leave as a barcode, the payment method, and also we can see the billing address. So by default, when we create an account, the billing address is the property address, but we can change and we can add, for example, so from today, we want to add John Smith as the correspondence address. His preferred correspondence method is post, so we send all the letters and correspondences to his address. So now that we have our property and our account, we can generate the bar to request the rateable value to the VOA. In this case, we go to the rateable property. And we can generate a trigger type event. And in this it is a new event. Notes are now tests. The effective date is 1st April 2021. The OS grid reference comes automatically from the Gazetteer files, and the planning reference, now we can select no plan. And the source is not a mandatory information, but we can select if the source is a third party, a BA inspector, or if it comes from the VOA. And we can also add supporting documents. So all the supporting evidences that we need to send to the VOA, we can add as a supporting document to the trigger type event. And we save the event. And then after saving and adding the events to the various properties we are leading, we can generate the bar and send the report to the VOA. So when we generate the bar, the system produces a report using the template provided by the VOA, and we pre-populate with all information needed to send to the VOA. And also we can submit the supporting documents to the VOA. So when we submit, the system will generate an email with all the supporting evidences and send automatically to the VOA. And once we have the answer from the VOA, we have the rating list with the rateable value. And then, when we
I'm just going to pause it there. And what I thought I'd do is, obviously, we've shown a section of the video. What I will do is now move on to the next product so that you can see the next product. These demos will be available. Should you want to sit through the entirety, we'll make them available that you can do that. So if I just move it on to the next product, what I don't want to do is take up all your time. Sure. Okay.
So let's create a new benefit claim. The first thing we need is an address. So we'll use this postcode lookup and select an address from the returned results. We also need a person to serve as an applicant. We can search our database to use an existing person, but in this case, we'll create a brand new applicant on the fly. You may notice tooltips appearing as I select various form controls to give me more information about them. When I click create, I'm taken to a blank new claim form with the newly created person added as the applicant. In order to determine housing and council tax benefit entitlement, I need to do an assessment. So I'll create one here. We'll give it today as the receive date and the Monday prior as the effective date. When I click create, I'm taken to the assessment form, which is where benefits assessors will spend most of their time. The system has automatically created me a new household with the newly created person added as the applicant. In our system, we use households to capture the details about the applicant, their family, and their personal and financial circumstances. So we'll do that now. I will add in a partner. You'll notice as I complete the form, each section will change from a red exclamation mark to a green tick to show me that that section is valid. That household looks good, but we'll create a second one from the Monday following. There I copied over the existing household to the new one. In this household, I'm going to add wages to the applicant. We'll save those households. We also need to add in one or more rent or council tax liabilities. In our system, we use liabilities to capture the details about the cost for which the applicant is attempting to get help. So I'll begin with a rent liability. We'll make this a rent allowance liability. And we'll say that the liability is for £100 a week. We get notifications to indicate that the system now has enough information to calculate a period of benefit entitlement, and we can see them here on the right-hand side of the screen. If we expand each period, we can see a breakdown. Here's the second one, including the earnings. That one is lower. Let's go back to that second household and we'll change it slightly. We should see the entitlement reduce in kind. Let's also say that this applicant has a liability to pay council tax. We'll say that's £15 a week. The system automatically calculates that entitlement too. We'll save that assessment and we'll commit it. And if we go back to our claim screen, we can see the newly created periods of entitlement. So let's do a change of circumstances. We'll say that takes effect from May the 1st. The system should copy over the household and liabilities that are valid for the new assessment. Here we see the wages. And let's increase the wages. Okay, and we can see here now that due to the applicant no longer qualifying for council tax support, we've produced an overpayment for the remainder of the financial year. So let's save that new assessment and commit it. Back in the new claim screen, and we can see that the periods of entitlement have been updated.
So I'm just going to stop the video there and jump to the next. Share. Marvellous. Can you see my screen? Yeah. So look, the demo was there to show you that they're there. The products are very, very well defined and very, very well advanced. So I think it's fair to say the business rates is the first on the list. I think it's around 95% there. When we did a code review, I was very impressed with what had been created, and when it was brought to Strata to have a look at in terms of taking it on behalf of Sedgemoor and the Alpha project, it was something that actually was a great opportunity for Strata to help try and push through. So Amanda did a really good job of explaining the issues with the current solution, but from a supplier point of view, we are, in terms of an ICT supplier, we are held on the hook with the same problems. We know there's a large monopoly, and we know there's a massive difficulty in accessing data, and quite often our customers, as in the councils, are looking to interface with that data at regular stages. That makes it really difficult for us to enable without APIs and available schemas that aren't at a massive high cost. We're not seeing visibility of a massive investment from the suppliers. That's not to say there may be stuff going on behind the scenes, but we're not seeing that investment keep up with the market that is needed. Current platforms are outdated. We know that, and in terms of that, may be why the current investment would be a massive undertaking to bring it up to a new standard. And within one eye on LGR, we also know that there's in ICT world, there's going to be a massive issue with staffing as LGR looks to cascade and collide these departments together. We will be looking to amalgamate data, and we know that in the ICT industry and the supplier industry, there will be a staffing deficit as people want to bring these projects online. All of that leads to a need to disrupt for all the good reasons that Amanda said. And the benefits of an open source is deafening in terms of when you start to look at these from at that level. So you want a system that's controlled by the council for the councils, no license cost, not with a not-profit orientation. It's actually about service efficiency. Open access to data and integration, and the good work that Craig's done today and the teams have done fully allows that integration to be there. Craig touched on it in terms of AI and being AI ready. We've all heard that AI is the next big thing, and it's so important that whatever back office systems you are using are AI ready and are providing AI at source rather than having to layer AI on top of a system, making it quite clunky. And it needs to be scalable and positioned for LGR, as I've said. So the cost to complete actually is quite, in terms of when you talk of a project of this scale, is actually quite frugal in terms of we need a couple of developers, a tester and a product manager to complete, and there's a few other bits and pieces, but the cost isn't exuberant in terms of completing the product. Now, there will be cloud infrastructure, and we've put in an estimate until it's full of data and up and running. This is Azure costs. We don't think that it will be 25k, but at the moment that's the figure that we're using to baseline the business case. Based on that, there's about circa 320k to complete the project. Now, with dual running costs going live, we know that there are 3 systems and 4 organisations that need to be part of the founders, 3 with direct transfers. We know that dual running costs of the existing suppliers really does slow the ROI whilst you're paying for the development and still paying for your current solution. But once you reach that tipping point of developments and founders being on, the savings become significant. And this is just the savings for the estimating on the existing founders that are part of the project from years 5 to 10 is about 1.6 million. So governance and next step. So a system, it needs to be fully featured, and I think Craig touched on that and Amanda touched on it. Actually, and I think that, from the demo that you've seen, you've only seen a very small element of the systems, but it is fully featured and it is designed to handle all the areas of benefits. It needs to be flexible, which is as part of being an open source, there needs to be a governance model that allows it to be flexible should we know that not all councils are the same. And iteratively improved, and there needs to be a process in place to iteratively improve. And this was where that I sat down with Amanda and a number of people, and we talked through what model would be appropriate and make sure that actually moving it forward, we have the right model to plan for success. So it needs to be operated by partners effectively that are all equal. Making sure that their developments are heard and added to a function list. There's a function group that can go through and evaluate, and I'll talk a bit more about that, and move to a modern 6-monthly release that you would expect with any product. So when we talked about licensing, and this was some of the work that had been undertaken with the Alpha project. So the product in its own right isn't necessarily free. Support and maintenance would be chargeable. And what we mean by that is there is a service wrapper that Strata would offer around the product, because you would want to make sure that maintenance releases are all managed in a cloud environment for individual councils. They don't have to take up on that, but we anticipate that because it's a base cost, why wouldn't you get the experts that are doing it daily and managing the software and creating the releases to implement it for you. They must accept the user terms and conditions of open source, which would go without saying, and licenses affect how people study, modify and distribute the software. There's a concept of copyleft, the type of license that stipulates anyone that releases or modifies the software and the code must release it back to open source. This is truly a community project in the data and the code. What we don't want to happen is suppliers to take the code, modify it to profiteer from the good work that previous departments have undertaken and that Strata will complete. And it just, therefore, it promotes collaboration and sharing. We've talked around the foundations as the owner of the core software. So this has to get up and running, and I'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like in a minute. But the founders will be the owners of the core software and would issue the open source license. So they'd give access to the source code, and they'd give access to use the software and the source code. The founders would continue to develop and maintain its software against legislation, making it low risk for local authorities. So because there's that functional group, and I'll go through a diagram shortly, it makes sure that legislation tech changes and are being included, and constant improvement from other authorities that potentially not all parties will have considered will be reviewed as part of that group. So in terms of the model, to start with and get this off the ground, we've looked at a founder-leader model where there are a number of founders we know that Leeds, Basildon and Teignbridge are taking the lead at this time, and they will have a clear line and get it over the line. As we get more mature and we get through the licensing, we will move to a foundation backed, where it's more of a cooperative model with no single organisation with overall control. And what we mean by that is moving to this model. So you have DWP and participating councils giving legislation changes, requirements, those elements, which goes to a functional group made up of participants of the project. That element, once they've created a backlog of functional requirements, that's then passed to the founders group to review the backlog list of things that need to go into a release, and then that flows through then to Strata to then look to develop. And then in that 6 monthly cycle, it continues being managed by the people that use the software, putting recommendations through to getting through to the backlog, and the founder group then decide in which order things go through, etc. So that's the areas that we've covered today. I think I'm going to pass back to Amanda to give you a bit of a wrap up and answer any questions that you may have.
Thanks, Steve. Mindful of time, because we've covered quite a lot there, I just want to thank everybody for taking the time to obviously listen to the presentation. We're really excited because it looks like we now have the opportunity to complete this software in the next 12 months, and we can see this as being a game changer, both in terms of LGR, but also in